You would think that 2 nurses and a doctor would be exactly the people that you would want at your side when you had an asthma attack and stopped breathing. But the 2 nurses and a doctor at this particular place were probably more trouble than they were worth. This is Christina with the Sisyphean Journal, and today is February 12th. Welcome to the Sisyphean Journal, where we talk about women's abortion deaths and how they could be prevented. In this case, the direct cause of the death was not the abortion. The cause of the death was the skillfulness or lack thereof at an abortion clinic when a patient started having trouble after the procedure while she was in the recovery room. So on February 10th of 1987, an ambulance crew was dispatched to an outpatient surgery clinic. They got a report that after successful, uneventful surgery, a woman started having asthma symptoms. The staff had helped her use her inhaler twice, but that hadn't helped. She'd started to go cyanotic. That's when your fingers start to turn blue. They put her on oxygen, and finally she'd stopped breathing entirely. When the ambulance crew arrived, they found the 22-year-old patient lying on the floor, which was where she should be. They at least got that part right. One person, later discovered to have been a nurse, was performing the supposed chest compressions of CPR. She wasn't doing them on the patient's chest where she was supposed to, right smack in the middle of the rib cage. No, she was doing the compressions here on the patient's abdomen, which, of course, not only does that fail to do anything for the heart, it doesn't even help move air in and out of the lungs, which if you're alone and you just do chest compressions on a patient, that can move enough air in and out of their lungs that even without providing the breaths, they can survive. So person number 1, who was later discovered to be a nurse, had no idea where to put her hands when doing chest compressions for CPR, and evidently can't tell the difference between a chest and an abdomen. The second person, later discovered to also have been a nurse, was doing the little bag valve mask thing, right? They had the oxygen hooked up, good, but she wasn't using the bag right. Every time she squeezed the bag, the patient's cheeks puffed out instead of the patient's chest expanding. And God knows she had a good view of the patient's chest because the other nurse wasn't anywhere near it. So this patient wasn't getting any air. Now, instead of checking, you're supposed to check for the pulse in the carotid artery right here. You put your fingers here, slide them down, feel the pulse. Instead of feeling for that there, the male staff who was present, who the EMTs later found out was a doctor, was feeling on the femoral artery, which is at the top of the patient's leg. And he was perfectly confident that these chest compressions were working just fine because he was feeling a pulse. Well, the reason he was feeling a pulse was because he was feeling every time the patient's abdomen was pressed on, that was pushing blood down through the femoral artery, but it wasn't circulating it through the body. Nobody had started professional level resuscitation. Nobody had intubated the patient. They weren't using a defibrillator. They weren't monitoring her cardiac signs on an EKG, and they had not administered any cardiac medications. So the ambulance crew loaded the young woman onto a stretcher. As one EMT noted, as my partner and I attempted to strap the patient onto the stretcher, The personnel of the facility began to run with the stretcher down the corridor. There appeared to be much confusion and no organization among the staff. So the medics took over care of the patient. She was finally successfully resuscitated at the hospital, but because of this improperly performed CPR, she'd suffered so much brain damage that they couldn't help her. She was declared dead February 12th. The outpatient facility in question was Planned Parenthood. The procedure in question had been an 8-week abortion. The patient's mother sued the facility when she learned, among other things, that neither of the 2 nurses on duty had current CPR certification. And let me tell you, if the doctor had it, it had been worthless too, because he was not properly supervising these 2 nurses. You don't have to be opposed to abortion, and you don't have to have an unfavorable opinion of Planned Parenthood to be appalled by this incompetence. And I get kind of sick of how the abortion lobby makes excuses for this sort of thing.